individuals comprehend the extent of movement tracking. And I'll show you some stuff on that in a moment. So can and how should this data be used in markets, and how do we as researchers investigate these issues? I think is the next, that's why I call it the new regulation. What should we do about these, if anything, right? So self-regulation. So I have here a Samsung phone, and they keep, I mean, every time I turn it on is my Samsung account notice, not again. Let me read you their privacy statement, which I have here. So they've written this in English now. So they're one of the few companies that actually has something you can understand, rather than a legalese. It's not legal. Privacy law, okay. We collect various types of information in connection with the services, including information you provide directly to us, information we collect about your use of our services, information we obtain from third-party sources. We may also seek your consent to collect information not described in the privacy policy. Learn more. Okay, learn more. Okay, well, I won't.
That's not the carrier. That's the device.
That's the device. And if you read the learn more in English, you say, "Why would I agree to any of this? What am I out of my mind?" And so I keep rejecting it. But it's a bot that keeps sending it to me. So the market-based approach is, could someone please tell me about a bot that's on my phone that swats all these things away? Because it's so annoying. At some point in my life, I'm going to say, oh, God, yes, I'll just take it. I can't see this every moment I turn on my phone. And so what we need is a market-based approach where there are, I have my defenses that I just swat the thing away, so I never see it. I tell them I don't want to see these things from Samsung or from Google or anybody. I don't want to agree to anything, and they're going to keep annoying me until they know I will give up, because it costs them nothing to send it to me. And to me, it's costly to get rid of it because I actually have to do something. So I want a bot. Can somebody please here tell me? Okay, so there.
Get a BlackBerry.
Get a BlackBerry.
Or jailbreak an iPhone.
Yeah. So there are ways to do it, but you have to either go back to my BlackBerry. We had no app, so it didn't matter. Sorry, I'm a Canadian, so I love BlackBerry, but I gave it up. So I think market-based solutions is a potential here, and I think there are opportunities for firms to enter in these defensive measures. I'm not sure about government regulation. Certainly we need transparency. I.e., the stuff cannot be written in legalese. It's got to be simple that people could understand it. But we've always shown in any of the experiments that information never works. And I think what Darcy was talking about this morning is, are people, Len, if you can't figure it out, how can someone who's in a poverty-stricken area of New York State understand this stuff? And so, but we need more transparency. It's clear people have no idea, maybe in this room, about what about you is out there in the internet now, and third-party sellers. What to me is the fact that all these people are selling my data to aggregators who are then reselling it to others. And so Ellie had a paper in Twitter, that knows where you are, and knows how much you paid, and it's much easier to trace rich people than poor people. Because rich people spend more, and they're much more traceable. The size of the purchase is really important in this unicity experiments. I don't know why. You can see that knowing the price of a transaction increases the risk of de-identification by 22% on average.
Because it's unique.
It's unique.
Yeah. The more you spend, the more unique the product is, and
The more unique product. And so what do we? But what they say in here, and I put in which didn't show up in I forgot to give it. I put a lot of double-edged swords out here because we've got to remember the first part of this. Large-scale data sets of human behavior have the potential to fundamentally transform the way you fight diseases, design cities, or perform research. So it's a double-edged sword. It's really great to have metadata, but it's really potentially bad to have metadata. And so what they look at here is the European Commission realizes that unicity, and they in Germany have come out with potential laws which say you cannot have metadata sets if it allows anyone to identify people after the fact. And the Montaglio says that means you can never have metadata, period. Because what they do here is they then say, okay, the problem with the data is it's at a specific time and a specific price. What if you put it over 15-day periods and big bins, like $1 to $100? 10 data points, you're not identifying anybody. So they say we got to be careful here. We can't put in protections, which means there's no metadata out there. So it's a double-edged sword. This is written. You know, the world of big data is a tremendous world, but it has its concerns, and it's not clear as yet what institutions we need to fight those. So we need experiments aimed at the other aspects of privacy. I had a bunch of other things in here. We got to look at symmetry. We got to look at some of these big theoretical issues as well. And everything on cybersecurity. There's market failures, public goods, asymmetric information. There's everything here. And as economists, I don't know if anyone who's looking at cybersecurity as an economic issue, and it's huge. So thank you.
May I ask a quick question?
Yes, go ahead.
In this world, it seems like the only real defense anybody's going to have to protect their privacy is disinformation. Is to put disinformation into the system, or unless your name is John Smith, right? The Plutkins, the Christians, and the Wabermans have a problem.
No, John Smith, who lives at a certain address, they know.
Right.
Your name doesn't help. Yeah.
I mean, I'm on Facebook as Joe Student, so.
Just in case I need to.
No, I think we've got to design some institutional constraints on it as the answer, because misinformation means we can't fight the disease properly, or
Well, I think it's the only
design all
way
these
that
better
puts.
things.
I guess what I'm saying is it seems like it's the only way that evens out the asymmetry, right? It's the only way. It's almost like a data terrorism, right? The asymmetry of power.
I think there's got to be a better solution than misinformation.
Well, let me try a conjoint with you. Okay. From a public policy standpoint, you just told us that consumers don't value privacy as much, so it's highly contextual, and therefore there are no absolute precepts in that. I'm on the regulatory side, and I'm looking at a Google or a Facebook, and I need to opt from making sure that they pay taxes, which they don't in most of the countries of the world, or making sure that I restrict their market power, protect consumer power. So force function those for consumer privacy. So force function those, and I'll answer what you just said. Does privacy go to my last position, and I emphasize market power? How do I manage these functions?
Well, I think they're kind of orthogonal. Taxing.
Well, that's why I said conjoint, because I want to get you away from the orthogonal.
So to me, privacy is is something that is not just, it's not a Google issue per se, but it's because of all the data that's out there that who may look at it. I think we need some institutional constraints. I don't think it has anything to do with Google having market power. Privacy is not a market power issue. It's a big data is out there issue, and I don't think dealing with Google is safe dealing with privacy, separate issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rick?
The question I had listening to you was, what is the market failure? Is it lack of informed consent? Is it prisoner's dilemma type situation? What is it? If I decide I'm perfectly happy with Amazon knowing everything about me, because that way they don't offer me ski equipment, but
UCLA birthday as well.
No, UC birthday. UCLA is somewhere else.
Come on.
Okay, what I'm going to talk about is a couple of case studies on either rethinking regulation in the Canadian example, which I think is a very pertinent case study for the discussion we've had, or the need to rethink regulation in the Alaska and U.S. national model. The area I'm going to talk about is northern Canada extending a little far south, this, and I'll show you that in another map, and Alaska, which are, for those of you interested in developing countries, very relevant in terms of sparsely populated regions that are expensive to serve, or Sullivan County, but even more so. But anyway, it fits in that nexus of issues, but also those faced by countries with very small and scattered populations. To set the international context, this research, I think, is not only relevant to the topics that have been mentioned today, but within the framework of the Arctic, which includes all the countries that have Arctic areas, and so the U.S. is an Arctic country because it has Alaska, and the U.S. is trying to educate its population about that. The Arctic Council has decided that this organization of Arctic states will be chaired by the U.S. for the next 2 years. And it has identified telecommunications infrastructure as one of the priorities for examination during its tenure. It's kind of interesting. So they say they think that the infrastructure is very poor and it's really important for development, and they want to set up an expert group to compile national assessments. Of course, they don't say anything about regulation or policy per se or where that fits in, but I think these case studies could be a useful contribution. But anyway, they recognize the value of telecom infrastructure in Arctic development. In the Canadian context, I'm going to be talking about the Canadian North, which includes the 3 territories of the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, the Inuit territory. But it also includes the northern parts of the provinces, which I'll show you in a minute, which is quite relevant for some of the policy because it means that it's more of a national geographic issue than some people might think in terms of where communication is accessible or not. And a lot of these communities are indigenous. Unemployment is typically very high. 15% is probably an overestimate. A lot of people have only seasonal jobs. Costs of living are high, and the population is very young. So I put this map in not so much because of the different tribal groups that it shows, but because the boundaries of areas where communication is really poor follow the tree line, the boreal region, and above fairly well. I mean, down here it's better, but much of this region falls into the categories of having not good broadband, for sure. And broadband is the focus of what I'm going to look at. So in terms of the policy and regulatory context, I think several themes that have been discussed today come out. First, the broadband targets. The CRTC, which is the Canadian regulator, in 2012 said, at that time that there were no targets, and they said we want 5 megs down, 1 megabit per second up, actual speeds to all households by the end of 2015, which is this year. They did not say how they would enforce that, but to their credit, they said, and I had hammered them in a proceeding that you need something concrete. And I wasn't the only one, but they did come up with something concrete. In 2013, they had a hearing on telecommunications in the remote north, served by a carrier called Northwest Tel, now part of Bell Canada. And the outcome of that hearing is quite relevant for what I'm going to present, because it led to a satellite inquiry on looking at what's the marketplace for satellite services in Canada, which concluded just last week. So if you haven't read the report, you're probably among the first to hear about this. And following on that, they've announced a basic service objective proceeding starting this year and into next year. And those are the 2 issues I'm going to address. Meanwhile, across the river, Industry Canada across the river from Gatineau to Ottawa. Industry Canada said, okay, we're going to set up targets. We want 5 megabits per second to 98% of Canadians by 2017. And for those of you who wonder why that year, it's 150 years after Confederation, which this government wants to hype. But you'll notice it's different metrics, different deadlines. And they said, oh yeah, but for the north, in the Arctic, 3 megabits is okay. So what does that mean? Where does that fit in with what the CRTC has already said? And they put some money into funds to expand broadband, 305 million Canadian, which sounds like it's considerably less than what New York is going to put in itself. And they're going to auction some spectrum starting about now, which they think could be used for rural and remote areas, 2500 band. Okay, so that's the context. What are the regulatory issues here? Well, under the Telecommunications Act in Canada, the CRTC can forbear from regulating, or basically not regulate, under several conditions, of which 2 I think are relevant for this discussion, and 2 are cited. I worked with some Native organizations on testimony in this hearing and the Northwest Tel hearing. So where the Commission finds that a telecom service or class of service is or will be subject to competition sufficient to protect the interests of users. So there's the competition clause in the italics I have added. So where they find there's enough competition, as we discussed earlier, that you don't need to regulate, or where the Commission finds that to refrain from regulation would be consistent with the Canadian telecom policy objectives. Well, that's interesting. So what are those objectives? That's a whole different criterion. And so some of the objectives that are relevant in this discussion about what about satellite service in the north are specifically included in the Act. And one is to render reliable and affordable telecommunication services of high quality accessible to Canadians in both urban and rural areas. And I've added the italics that are relevant. And to respond to the economic and social requirements of users of services. So in the Northwest Tel hearing about service in the north, there was a lot of testimony that said satellite services are neither reliable nor affordable, which addresses this criterion of telecom policy objectives. They're not necessarily very often of high quality, and we don't have any choice of who provides these satellite, fixed satellite, or wholesale satellite services, which gets to the competition issue. So that's why the CRTC said, well, maybe we should look at satellite service in Canada and try to figure out what's going on in the market for satellites, and especially as it affects regions that are dependent on satellite communication. So this, in fact, is Northwest Tel's territory. The red lines show mostly microwave, a little bit of fiber. All the little black satellite dishes, I guess they're supposed to be, show where communities are dependent on satellite, mostly for voice and data, which includes internet, and for TV for that matter. It turns out that there are a bunch of communities in this region as well that are also satellite dependent. They're not served by Northwest Tel, and I'll show you that in a minute. So this basically is the region that the Commission said, well, we've heard from quite a few communities that are totally dependent on satellite service. Is this something we have to deal with for the long term, or is this something that's going to go away because of competition or other technologies? And furthermore, what's going on in this marketplace? So there are 2 models of providing satellite service in remote regions. One, which the Commission calls the community aggregator model, and this is, you might think of as analogous to a cable head end. In other words, there's some feed coming into a community, and then there's a local network that delivers service out from that. And this is the predominant one. Also now we have some satellite coverage that provides direct-to-home internet service for individual users with small VSATs for each individual household that wants to subscribe. This map, which the Commission put together based on data that they collected as part of the proceeding, as well as other sources, shows the extent of the problem geographically, in that all the communities with dots here are somehow dependent on the community aggregator model. The ones with blue for voice and internet service, and a few of them just for internet, but you'll see that it isn't even just internet, communication in general. So they're saying, okay, here's where these communities are that are using this community access model. There turn out to be about 18,000 households, which is a very small number. It's really less than 2% of Canadian households. You'll see that a few of them have service less than 1.5 megabits per second, only 8% of these households. Most of them have something, but much less than the 5 megabits per second target that the CRTC, has decided. And none of them meet the CRTC's requirements for by the end of this year. Many of them are below that 60th parallel, so they're not just in the territories. A lot of them are primarily indigenous, and what's relevant for serving them is that they're clustered in settlements or villages. They're not scattered over a lot of terrain like farms or ranches, for example. One question the Commission asked was, well, is there any competition out there? Not only from other providers in C-band, which for those in the satellite field is the one that covers most of Canada, and I'll show you a map in a minute. What else is going on with other technologies? Well, one technology, KU-band, now is mostly TV. Ka-band, which is much higher frequency, does provide wide coverage, is often used for direct-to-home internet access, does not provide telephony, and they're concerned about communities in the far north that rely on satellite service for telephony. Individual installations, such as I showed you, make more economic sense for scattered population, for scattered households, than they do for clustered ones, so perhaps that's not competitive. There's a new breed of satellite called high throughput satellites, which some of us were talking about a bit at lunchtime, which has a lot more bandwidth, and thinks that the investors think that those are going to be the ones that solve Darcy's problem and the rural America problem. At least their business model is not based on only serving really remote communities. Who knows whether they will succeed, but they're not serving this market at the moment. There might be some submarine fiber, I'll show you where that is, but it's not going to reach most of these communities, and there might be a little bit of microwave, but satellite dependency is still important. Okay, so Telesat is the main C-band provider. You can see this is their typical coverage map, and that's why they're used. They provide this coverage, and wow, okay, I will try to speed up. And nobody else provides coverage of the region that I showed you the way they do. This is the new proposed and new high throughput satellites, HTS, and you'll see their coverage is down in this maybe rural where there's some farms and ranches, but they aren't even at this point planning to provide any coverage up here, even though they are a potential solution. The fiber Arctic model, if it's built, proposes just to go along the coast. It's somewhat relevant for parts of Alaska. It doesn't really do much down in here. Forecasts for prices for voice and data show that C-band transport costs pricing are likely to go up as opposed to the rest of the world, where they are either flat or potentially declining. I would have put a chart in from the report, except that where it says Canadian transport prices, there's a bunch of asterisks because Telesat said don't release that. So the Commission says that it's higher than even average of North America, but it's not shown. Overall, the Commission decided that Telesat plays a highly dominant role in this frequency, and is pretty dominant even in the others, and therefore is in a very dominant market position, whereas the other satellite providers that they looked hard at play a minimal or very low role and therefore really aren't effective competitors. So this addresses the market share. Do we need to look at this case again? So the findings from the Commission were that after 1999, when the CRTC had last looked at fixed satellite services and decided they were competitive, they set price ceilings, but they basically forbore from regulating fixed satellite service. Now they find that the prices have dropped some, not surprisingly, in terms of technological efficiency, but there's a lot of unused capacity there. So what's going on? Why are the prices relatively high, even though below what they were 15 years ago, which is nice, but you would hope. But there's unused capacity and people need more capacity. Why are the prices higher even than the North American average and significantly higher than C-band in the rest of the world? So they came to the conclusion that while there was no evidence that Telesat had abused its market power, the regulatory oversight is still needed, and they want to initiate a proceeding to review the price ceiling for C-band FSS. So they basically decided that they're going to potentially re-regulate fixed satellite services, having decided they didn't need to regulate them 15 years ago. The basic service objective hearing is related in that starting in 2 months, the CRTC will look at what basic service should mean in Canada and whether that should be changed. So right now it means you get local touchtone service, you get local dial-up, which in 1999 was significant because people were having to pay for dial-up, but it's not very relevant now. You get access to the long-distance network and some enhanced services and a phone book if you want. Now the issue is, should basic service include broadband, and if so, what kind of broadband? Do we need to change the subsidy schemes? Should there be specific metrics for affordability? And what about satellite-served regions that have constraints that they've just been examining? So that's that case. One other point, well, a couple of other points. I'm going to stretch my time a little. We've had some discussion this morning about participation in the regulatory process and how it's important in a democratic model. And I think that this is a real success story. In Canada in the past 3 years, many Indigenous organizations have been involved. And no, I'm going to continue a minute or two. And I won't cut into your time. We see a group from Nunavut, from Arctic Quebec, other parts of northern Quebec that are other First Nations, satellite providers that are operated by First Nations people, and in northern Ontario, and some other consumer groups. And so it's taken a lot of effort. I've tried to help these groups, and I think we're seeing a lot of involvement in the process. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on Alaska and jump to the relevant part. Alaska has a population.
Got it.
No, I'm going to jump to the couple of slides.
That's okay, I can go fast.
Okay, just give me 2 minutes.
Arbitrage.
Alaska is very similar in terms of its demographics and size. This part has terrestrial broadband. These are all satellite based. And what I want to get to is pricing. So in 2012, terrestrial broadband went into this region, and it's been extended now up to here in southwest Alaska. So the point is, okay, infrastructure went in with federal subsidies significantly, but one way or another, but the prices are still high. When we asked people in 2012, do you think you'll sign up for broadband? About half of them said, well, it depends. Depends on what? It depends on the price. And we haven't finished the after broadband study, but already we're getting a lot of comments from organizations saying that the pricing is limiting their usage, largely because of bandwidth caps. And one chart, and then I will finish up, to show you that the cheapest for 2 megabits in villages that have now terrestrial broadband is $65 with fairly low caps. and up, whereas in Anchorage you could get 10 megs for $40. So there's huge disparities, as well as these are much poorer populations and have very different demographics. And in fact, the service that the carrier put in because of some initial complaints is 512, and that isn't even broadband even under the FCC's old definition. So affordability remains an issue. And in Canada, we have a wholesale monopoly, limited subsidies of one sort and another, but a fairly proactive regulator at this point trying to address at least some of these issues. In Alaska, we have heavy dependence on universal service funds, which are very valuable, and I skipped over them. Many of you know about them. But we have a middle mile, which is an unregulated monopoly at this point, and we don't really have any oversight of pricing or any handle on how to deal with that. So this is where re-regulation or consideration of affordability or pricing really is an issue, I think, that's been missed largely in the US. So I will wind up and let you know that I have a book on Alaska communications coming out called Connecting Alaskans by September, and I hope it will be of interest not only to people interested in Alaska, but people interested in policy for rural and developing regions. Thank you. Thank you, fellow panelists.
So our next speaker is going to be Jim Allman. Jim, you have a set of slides?
Oh, yes.
Do this.
Okay, first thing to note is I am not Rappaport. He unfortunately couldn't make it, so I wish you would address all your questions to him. I'll give you his phone number at the end of the presentation, and you could dial him up. This paper is a continuation of a paper that we did on Latin American countries where what we were trying to do was to see the impact of regulations. It was partly because I received a research grant from Telefonica, and that's what they wanted to look at Latin American countries. So that's why I looked at Latin and Central American countries.
Not out of pure interest.
That too. But the other thing that the problem that we had with that study was that we did not have a good regulatory indicator. We used some proxies that we thought might work, and we, in that case, we came up with some inconclusive conclusions. So play with that metaphor. What I'm going to do, because Heather used up all my time, I'm going to go through a very quick overview of the literature, and then I'm going to talk about the OCT environments in OECD countries. So OECD was a richer data set, and I thought I could get some more information. And part of that, I used Len Waverman's Regulatory and Governance Index to see if that would help in this regulatory variable that we looked at. So let's continue. This is a story that most of you in this room know, that telecoms has been managed, mostly controlled and owned by the state for a number of years, and the notion for the intervention was a market failure, but then we had liberalization and privatization that came along in the 80s, and that's now our orthodoxy, although now we're going back to A to B and back to A again. So there was a whole set of literature that tried to understand what difference this made, what was the impact of ICT on telecommunication, on economic growth and development. It was a very big issue at the time. The ITU in the 80s was really pushing it. The Maitland Commission report came out. So there was some issue on growth because except for a few very simple regression analysis, there wasn't much work that had been done. There's that growth literature, and then there's some public policy and regulation. Oh, it looks like we are having tea or coffee. Just go back there if you will, please. So there's some work on the efficacy of the reforms, the quality of regulation, issues of access pricing, and so forth. Growth, Waverman, Roller is in their seminal article in 2001, dealt with this, and also Rao Katz in a series of papers has dealt with this. So that has been pretty well done. The ICT impact was shown by Roller and Waverman. They did a very nice critique of some of the earlier models, and more recently, Waverman, I keep referring to you, but you're in the room, has done the work on some mobile impact in 2005 and so forth. So we also then have the efficacy of the reforms, the quality of regulation, access pricing, and regulation. In the internet environment, though, recall in the early days was really maybe fixed line telephones, and then we had the explosion of cellular telephones, and now we have internet service. So this is the blank slide, so now I have to revert back to this slide. What is displayed here is the mobiles per population in low, well, there's 32 OECD countries. I divided them into the low index and the high index. So this is the countries with the very low index, saying that they don't have a lot of regulation. I think at the Estonia is the blue line, and you can kind of follow on down to the Netherlands is down at the bottom. If you, oops, oh, I'm missing a slide here too, it looks like. The high ones you'll have to imagine. And then I looked at mobiles and the growth rate. So this now is the ranking of the 32 countries. And you can see in general that on the lower end of the axis, that the growth rates seem to be higher. And I wonder, in your work, Raul, where you saw that that there was an increase in growth, you have to wonder whether that's the kind of on the accelerated portion of the growth curve. We don't know that yet, but it's something we have to worry about in terms of causality and so forth. So that was the one set. Here's the internet, what happened with the internet, again ranked from, well, in this case, high, and maybe I don't have low, so I see what happened. I missed, so this is the high internet growth. I thought I had a growth rate here. Maybe I don't. I guess I don't. Well, the growth rate for the internet looks very similar. I've had a digital disaster this week, so that's partly what's going on. The growth rate for the low-income countries again looks high compared to the high regulation index. And for all countries except Germany, which somehow had a 40% compound average growth rate. We're still looking at that, so think of this as all part of a work in progress. So I've shown you some of those. So there was some progress made in new ITC. Looking at the old fixed line service in our earlier data, we didn't look at it specifically in this paper. That's just kind of going on and not making much progress altogether, similar to the United States and elsewhere where the fixed line service is losing customers. So the question, though, that we're trying to ask here is, well, what was the progress due? Was it due to technical change, the privatization, regulatory reform, and liberalization? Could it have been better? So the way we approached this was to use the Roller-Waverman methodology. We did not get to the Burrow methodology, again, data problems. Which takes an annual production function and estimates three equations: production, demand, and investment. And in this case, we used real GDP, we used log of labor force and capital, and then mobile penetration rates. For the demand side, we used log mobile penetration. The first was log GDP as well. Telephone prices and mobile prices, real GDP again, and internet penetration. And the investment equation, which is in quotes, was the differential of the mobile penetration rates and the mobile pricing and telephone pricing, and then this regulatory variable that we discussed before. And the results are somewhat promising in one sense. For the output equation, the coefficients on capital and labor turn out to add to almost 1, which is consistent with constant returns to scale and a Cobb-Douglas production function. The mobile penetration showed a positive sign. When we go to the demand side, we get the right sign on the mobile prices. We get a high but GDP per capita elasticity, and internet penetration again is positive, and telephone prices. All of these are significant. By the way, the others were very significant as well. As you can see, the capital and labor are super significant, whatever that means statistically. And then the investment equation, again in quotes, we have mobile prices. And that's significant. When you come to the regulatory variable, it's not quite significant, but it has promise, let's put it that way. So we'll continue to work on that. And then the telephone prices comes in significant and negative. So what does this say to us? Well, the results are suggestive that weaker regulation supports some investment in ICT, and this is due to the higher prices of the service. Significant issues remain. What have been the impact of reforms? I think we still need to refine that. I think that Raul has a nice fix on that. A nice way of looking at that, so I'd be interested in seeing how that comes out. Were the privatizations successful? We still don't know, and the key question that we've asked in this conference are the regulatory instruments adequate for social control? And I think Bruce will have a lot to say about that in a minute. So. What will be the impact on consumers, and what lessons can we learn from the last 2 or 3 decades? And address all your questions to 215-884-4155. I don't think they do that anymore, Ellie. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Bruce Fishnick. Bruce. Let me see your slides up for you. I don't know if you actually opened the room. Let's take a look. Here's where title. I think this one.
Yeah, TI, something.
I think this is you. This is you, but I don't know why it's not opening. Oh, there it goes. Do you have some kind of like large file in there?
I don't think so.
This one doesn't seem to open.
I have another version of it. There it is. Okay. And this is,
Forward is the one on the left.
forward is the one on the left.
This one right here. Big one.
Okay, great. My name is Bruce Kushnick. I'm the Executive Director of New Networks Institute. We have an independent team of auditors, analysts, experts, and lawyers working on projects, and I'll be glad to talk to you about them. On the left. This button here. Okay. The conversation today for the goal is to how do we get to an open, ubiquitous, very fast, broadband, internet, broadband cable services that are reasonably priced and delivered as part of a utility. And let me explain some of the words I used. Open to me means reestablishing competition in the United States where customers get to choose their internet, broadband, cable, and phone company. Ubiquitous means everybody gets served, including rural, urban, and suburban areas. Very fast, the target is gigabit speeds. Reasonably priced, meaning the total bill is fair and reasonable. And utility means the networks are regulated. The services are not regulated because there are choice and competition. Now, I'm going to call for divestiture too. Ellie just left, but it turns out that Ellie coined the term. I thought I did in 1992 when I gave a speech saying we should have a second divestiture, but Ellie beat me by a couple of years. And you're going to say, well, there's no willpower to do this. And I'll explain what I mean by this. I believe there is willpower. It turns out that the ISPs in America were the most hated companies in 2013, followed by in 2014, the cable companies were the most hated companies in America. And it turns out that basically these surveys, the ISPs and the cable companies beat out the credit card companies and the airlines. Ellie, I gave you credit for this. Divestiture too, thanks. Okay, and so if the companies are the most hated, and there were 4 million people that filed with the FCC claiming that they wanted net neutrality, my belief is that this is the main problem. This is my Time Warner cable triple play bill, which went from an $89.99 package to $190.77 in the period of 2 years. When people look at the bill, they go, and so there was a promotional price. Now, it turns out that since the October bill that I just showed you, my bill went up another $6 to a total of $196, which means that it had an increase of 120% in 2 years. The words fair and reasonable cannot be used in the same sentence with that bill. You can never, ever get the advertised price. The advertised price is a fraction of the total bill. It's missing the taxes, fees, and surcharges, of which some of the taxes and fees and surcharges are made up. For example, there's a broadcast fee for $5.50. There's a pass-through series of taxes that basically were for excise taxes, which is their taxes that we pay. The set-top box is currently $11.25 a month, and the cable modem service is $8 monthly. Let me go back to the bill. Sorry. Nope. There we go. Just so you can stare at it, because if you look at the different parts of the bill, you'll see, for example, that there's nothing on that bill that made me happy. What can I say? Actually, the FCC decided that it would try to fix this, by the way, in the new recent net neutrality order. They said, well, the government should make sure that phone bills, when they get the bills, they have all of the promotional pricing beforehand and explain all the little charges and that what the bill will be when you when you sign up, what it's going to cost you in 2 years. Of course, this is the net neutrality order is being sued over, so I don't have a lot of hope for that to happen. Okay, this way. But my take on the bills is there's no oversight, and it's a jurisdictional morass. For example, there is a cable franchise, which is not part of the utility. There are, the FCC has taken over broadband and internet, which they claim is an information service, which and then they've recently claimed it's now a telecommunication service, in which it's being sued over, and it's de-tariffed, it's deregulated. And so no one regulator examines the total costs. And on this bill, it turns out that there are mistakes. The Universal Service Fund was off by 7 cents. I was overcharged. And not only that, but the cable franchise fee was off by $1, which I was overcharged. There's no Rosetta Stone to explain how they calculate the taxes, fees, and surcharges, and it violates pretty much 30 to 50 different truth in billing, truth in advertising laws. That wouldn't bother me as much, but, sorry, the wrong way. There's really no effective competition. For example, the price increase of 120% in 2 years cannot possibly prove that there is competition. Verizon is the only other wire in my house, and their packages are identical in their deception. I cannot go out. In fact, I got a free piece of pizza last week when I told the guy I was going to give the speech, and he said to me, "Did you see my Verizon bill?" And he pulls it out, and he says, "I paid. It was a $59.95 package, and I'm currently paying $146.75." And I said to him, "That doesn't sound reasonable or fair, and I'll try to do something about that for you." He says, "Here's a free slice of pizza." He's never given me a free slice of pizza in 10 years. The next thing is cutting the cord. It just means less service. For example, Hulu and Netflix do not carry most of the cable programming. I can't buy an a la carte price service. There is no cord to cut for high-speed broadband. Wireless is not a substitute because of bandwidth caps. And the only way I can get lower prices is that there are discounts if I buy the bundle. Meanwhile, Verizon was harvesting my account. My local POTS service went to over $60 a month. And I'll explain what happened to that, which I'll come back to. Now the FCC, so if in Brooklyn I have two choices and both of them are bad, the FCC's report shows clearly that there's other problems around the United States. According to the FCC, for companies that have 25 megabits, 25% of the United States has 25 megabits or more with two or more providers. 55% of the United States has one provider, and 20% of the United States has no providers for over 25%. This is not my numbers. This is what the FCC said. And it's not going to get better. It's not going to get better at all. This chart, which took me 2.5 days to figure out, because I had to figure out the coverage areas of AT&T, Verizon, and CenturyLink. Coverage areas meaning how many housing units, businesses, and locations do these companies cover, and what is the penetration that they currently have today for services. AT&T has 62 million housing units, 18 million business establishments, which comes out to 80 million locations, but they only are going to pass 33 million households with their video service, meaning that only 41% of the population will ever have video from AT&T by the year 2016. Verizon has 35 million locations, has 15 million households passed with video. They have 42% of the coverage. We are stuck with N. If you look at the current, AT&T has 5.9 million UVerse video customers. Verizon has 5.6 million video customers. And CenturyLink is just play acting at the whole thing. They have 250,000 customers. It comes out to 11.7 million customers out of 133 million locations. This is not good. So, and this chart, by the way, is taken from FCC data about coverage areas and households. Was taken from census, and so is business. So the problem here is that AT&T's entire UVerse is based on the copper to the home service. AT&T basically tells everybody it's fiber, but there's a fiber optic wire within a half mile. Therefore, AT&T can't ever get to 100 megabit speeds. AT&T's gigapower with 100 cities is just made up. Based on history, we know that it's just to go out and try to get the DirecTV merger to happen. Verizon has stopped rolling out Fios, and so therefore there's no more rollout for them. And CenturyLink has really no plans, as far as we can tell. They have a product called Prism. They're just sort of making up as they go along, it seems. So, are things going to get better? As they say in Brooklyn, forget about it. Net neutrality was a band-aid in 2005. It is going to be tied up in court for 3 to 5 years. And the guts of Title II, which is what the FCC did to create this new problem, which will be sued over. Title II basically is telecommunications, a service that was applied to internet and broadband. It doesn't fix any of the primary issues like getting the set wired. It removes, the FCC's plan removes unbundling, price regulation, and all data collection requirements. The municipality bills are not going to scale to the place where we have America gets wired. Google only has 30,000 customers according to multiple reports. Everybody thinks that they are, millions. They're only 30,000. And there's a group called ALEC that basically has been going around to erase the laws of the United States. And so they have 35 states that they went and erased the telecommunications laws. In Florida, they've even erased the rights of the commission to have oversight over phone lines. And ALEC basically is the one responsible for bills that got rid of the municipalities' right to go out and offer services. There's massive confusion on the public. The public think that the internet is the infrastructure, is something, but they don't really get it right. And wireless, which everybody talks about, well, we'll bypass. All Wi-Fi, all hotspots, and all call service ends up on a wire. The companies that control the wire control access and control America's broadband infrastructure. So my feeling is there's really no accountability, oversight, enforcement, data collection, and privacy, and transparency, and facts. Most people do not want to hold the companies accountable for bad acts. They want to bypass, or they want to go out and have to give the companies more money. There's been no audits for cross subsidies for the last 15 years, which I'll explain. The state commitments that were made for fiber optics, no state has ever gone back and hold a company accountable for their broadband commitments, which I will discuss. The FCC has stopped collecting basic data in 2007, and no state except for New York State collects basic financial information anymore. So there is a positive information. We are now working blindly. So here's Opportunity New Jersey. Opportunity New Jersey was passed in 1993, and it says by the year 2010, 100% of Verizon New Jersey will have a 45 megabit service by the year 2010. And if the law wasn't changed, it would go to 2030. But since it is changed, 100% will be done in 2010. Customers, and so it's broadband is 45 megabits in both directions. This is in the 1993 law. The same law is in Pennsylvania. The same law was in Texas. The same law was actually in a bunch of other states. Not only is 100% of the state was supposed to, of Verizon territory supposed to be done, but it was urban, suburban, and rural areas were supposed to be completed. Customers paid about $15 billion, we estimate. And in 2012, using this law, we helped get 2 small towns in New Jersey wired with fiber optics. To bring up the point, the law is currently in court because the advocate's office, the state commission decided to erase the law with Verizon in an agreement. The advocate is trying to stop this. But it keeps going. Every state's a little different. In the state of Pennsylvania was supposed to be wired by 2015. There are massive cross subsidies as well that we uncovered. In the state of New York, which this happens in every state, in the state of New York, Verizon has decided that its fiber optic wires are Title II, common carriage, telecommunications services based on the 1934 Act, of which they told the FCC that Title II harms investment. In New York in 2006, Verizon goes to the state and says, please, if you give us more money, raise our rates, we will go out and have massive deployment of fiber optics, and we have all these losses that we need to cover. There were 3 rate increases for 84%, which brought my bill up to $60, by the way. That's how it got there. And essentially what happened was this: Verizon has taken the monies that were supposed to use for construction for the utility and put it to wireless services as well as the FiOS services. They did not upgrade the utility. The state AG's office found 75% of the construction budgets had been moved to the wireless company and the special access and FiOS. Verizon has announced that they stopped rolling out FiOS, which means 80% of the state is no longer going to be wired. Okay? Not only that, but 100% of customers have paid for this network, approximately $550 by the end of 2013, which comes out to, I think, $4.5 billion. Verizon also has a deal with the cable companies to not roll out in areas where they have a bundle. So, how do we fix this? How do we go to the next step? My answer is follow the money. Go after all the money and the commitments that were made for fiber optics in the state. 1. Go after all the subsidies that were done for the wireless company that shouldn't have been given to them. We're talking about billions of dollars per state. And 3, there's a thing called the social contract, which I don't want to take my time for. But the social contract basically is the cable companies were allowed to raise rates $5 a month to pay for the wiring of schools and upgrading the networks. It was supposed to stop in 2001. They never stopped charging the customers. It comes out to $840 a customer extra since 2001. But the other part is we need to go out and open the networks to competition. We need to separate the wireless companies and the affiliates from being able to use the construction budgets of the networks. We need to put that back into the ability to give Sullivan County the wiring that they require. The special access wires, which is all the backhaul stuff, needs to be returned to the utility at regulated rates. Why? Because customers paid for the construction of it. We need to stop all the construction budgets from being going into all the other affiliates, including paying for the cable service. Therefore, have the money for the utility spread out. And finally, we need data. The FCC has stopped publishing the data. The states have stopped publishing the data. We're walking in the blind, except for New York State, which actually is the only state that publishes the regulated books. I was asked by Ellie not to talk about history. My new book just came out called The Book of Broken Promises. It's 581 pages, it's 721 footnotes, and it's the third in a trilogy that started in 1998. It tells you the entire story of the broken promises for the wiring, for all of the cross subsidies and everything else you may want to know about. Thanks a lot. And I made it on time.
And so I'll now invite all the panelists back up here. And Raul, I don't know if you feel more comfortable standing up here to discuss, or
Yeah, probably.
Okay, great.
Okay. These are 3 great papers, and in fact there's quite a bit of commonality across the 3 of them. There is somewhat of a thread. I mean, we start with a developing region, and in Alaska and in the north, and we end in a developing region like Sullivan County. So clearly the issues are very common, passing through as to whether regulation can actually affect the patterns or not. In Heather's paper, I mean, I could have changed the names of Alaska and put it with any emerging country, and the issues would have been the same, and Judith is in agreement with that. Irrationality in defining targets of coverage and speed in the broadband plans. We've seen that in every single country, not only in the emerging world, but also in Europe. I mean, the issue why partly the Europe digital agenda is failing is because the targets were completely defined politically and without any sort of impact study. Her mention of community aggregators, we call them, well, the name started in Sri Lanka with micro telcos. We are experimenting with them in Brazil and Colombia, where the micro telco relies on unlicensed spectrum and delivers service to the rural areas. Is exactly the same business model, except obviously the backbone is different. Yours is satellite, ours is fiber optic, but it's the same thing. And that takes me to the transit prices. Clearly, there is an issue of lack of competition, as you mentioned. We've seen that in emerging countries, the government intervenes, deploys a state-owned private facility, and just the threat of competition drives the wholesale prices down. So more so than regulation is the threat to trigger the behavior on the part of the main providers. So I think that your paper was very familiar to the issues at heart. And then on Jim's and Paul's paper, yeah, clearly the issue is a regulatory variable, and we're trying to push the envelope on the issue of can we actually bring it back to prove it in the models. I think that there are 2 issues coming up. One is whether the index that Len is using is a composite of several metrics that includes things that could be countervailing to the issue of investment. So if you're a structural model, you don't see the kind of significance because there are so many factors that are blended into that index that maybe some things favor investment, others cancel out investment. The other thing at the theoretical level is that we're trying to push more on the inverted U theory of Philip Aghion at Harvard that says, well, there is an optimal level of regulation after which the level of investment drops, the level of innovation drops. So how much do we push regulation is something to be decided. We haven't yet been able to come up with the right model of that, but we think that's probably an interesting frontier to go after. And then we get to Bruce's paper, and Bruce obviously brings it back to some of the issues that Heather had raised, although with some specificities. I started thinking about the taxation issue, and clearly there I think that there are a couple of things. One is the incidence theory on taxation, that all the taxes are being shoveled to us, and I think that the burden of taxation, the thing is not that clear. I mean, they should absorb some of that taxation increases, and at least that's what one might think theoretically, but that's not happening. And the other one that I'm wondering is whether there's some overshifting, that what is being shifted in terms of pricing to the consumer is more than the tax that is being carried on by the carriers.
There's no audits.
Sorry?
There's no audits.
Yeah.
The Universal Service Fund that I'm being overcharged 7 cents for, we have no idea whether or not that's ever been.
That one, that was, I mean, really shocked me because.
By the way, 80% of all bills have mistakes.
Well,
in the United
but
States.
you see, that because I did the calculation of the Universal Service Fund as a result of Title II, if Title II were to go through
Right.
on the cable companies, and the formulas are there. I mean, I don't know how the mistake can happen if actually the formulas are clearly stated by the fund.
Well, and also that there's a simple mathematics. We have an auditor who basically, just so you know, we've taken 5 class action suits as a group. We've won 2 have been settled. One was about overcharging on packages on lines that don't exist. One was the one on charging for packages that don't exist.
Yeah.
One is for the failure to include a discount. And what you find is human error is going to account for 7 to 15% of all mistakes in all databases. Because the databases don't talk to each other, you'll have these mismatches. And 2, for example, the 7% tax could be that they just used the wrong calculation date. So instead of going for the third month, the third quarter, they use the second quarter. However, it turns out this is common on every bill. And so my feeling is they don't care anymore about these issues.
In any case, I mean, while I agree on your points, then I get to another higher level question, which goes back to Jim's attempt to prove the value of regulation and fostering investment. And you outlined sort of like a strawman scenario. How about if we were to go after this situation and trying to reverse it under divestiture 2?
Right.
Now the alternative, and not that I'm prone to that, but I'm saying maybe we should look at the impact, would be just assume that there's some rationality to the current system. And I know that this is going to be very not politically correct, but what if we were to assume that in fact Sullivan County or Alaska shouldn't get the kind of 25 megs speed? What about if people aren't actually needing that? Because I mean, the problem is the more I look, and it's less of a supply gap, particularly in the emerging world, not less, but at least beyond Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo, Santiago, and the like, and more of a demand gap. That there's no content, that there's no digital literacy, that the prices are high, things of that sort. But the issue of speed is not being raised as much. So maybe the alternative scenario to the one that you put, the divestiture 2, is saying, hey, you know, let's assume that there's going to be some sort of a 2-tiered situation, and that's going to be the state of the art, and that we'll have to manage. And there I get, let me finish. And then I get back to Heather's point. Maybe we define targets in a more precise fashion. Maybe we go after this figure of the business model of the community aggregators relying on unlicensed spectrum that fulfill the needs of these pockets of requirements, and we leave it as it is. It's not that
But you need
trying to.
some minimum speed.
Oh, no,
to
definitely.
be-
But a Wi-Fi on a
Yes,
licensed
yeah.
spectrum could give you on super Wi-Fi could give you like 7 megs on an 18-mile radius.
But the thing that's most important to me is that there's the contract with the people who've already paid for the services.
Yeah,
And so the question the question that you're saying is let's not worry about the contracts or enforcement, which I think to me is the core of what should happen next. The core is in New Jersey, the whole state was supposed to be worried, it wasn't, and there's on the books, customers paying $4,000 to $5,000 each.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. So the question is making the customers whole versus a policy issue of we have to arbitrage what happens in the future.
But this is more to the,
Yeah,
the
and it's not making a value judgment on what you just said.
No, right.
I'm just saying, let's do an impact analysis of both alternatives, and then figure out a way to go on this. Recognizing that there's a lot of justice in what you just said, but I'd like to look at the alternative.
Of
And with that, I shut up.
Okay, I think a couple of points that
Beforehand,
respond to the discussion.
Sure.
I'd like to open it up to questions because I think there probably are a few from the audience. Are there any questions from the audience?
You can respond to this.
Sullivan County is going to kill me.
She's not here, so that's okay. So Heather, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, there's,
Like you said,
just
yeah.
have your hand up. I can't see. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Raul's points well taken. I think there are a couple of interesting issues in the Canadian context. One is that the CRTC in 1999 decided that fixed satellite service was competitive, and so they basically deregulated, except they had a price ceiling. And 15 years later, they said, "Oh, maybe it's not." You know, and that's a rare thing to do, to come back and look at a service and say, either we got it wrong or something's changed here. And so they're being more proactive than regulators. I mean, we're still not through it yet, you know, to see whether they enforce some of what they're saying. The other is, I don't think there's any representatives of carriers here. They're not. I think Telesat made a strategic error in the Northwest Tel proceeding, which was the one that looked at the quality of service by the carrier in the north, because many of the many comments were made about, as I said, poor quality of service and high prices. And the providers all said, whether it was Northwest Tel or some ISP, don't look at us. We can't do anything. It's all Telesat. They're the only supplier. They, you know, our quality of service is dependent on them, and our pricing is basic and pass through and some markup. Telesat wasn't there. It was not the subject of the inquiry. It didn't have to be there, but by not being there, they had no opportunity to defend their point of view, which they spent an enormous amount of time in the inquiry trying to justify. Yes, there is competition, and here's why. You know what's happening with the technology and the pricing, and on and on and on. So by not being a party, they basically sort of, I think, helped to focus attention on whether or not they were in a market dominant position, and if so, should that be examined by the regulator?
Yeah, they screwed up.
By the way, Joe Plotkin and I have been working with the competitive side for the last 15 years. And we have a complete model of what happens of investment and when it shows up and how it shows up and what happens with competition based on the volumes of data that we've collected over the last couple of years. It turns out that it doesn't matter. The ultimate goal is not the regulation and the investment, it's the carrot. The entire history of broadband in the United States is based on a series of carrots, broadband carrots. We will promise to do this in exchange for getting rid of regulation. Then there's no enforcement of that thing, but the investment didn't happen. We have models for 30 states. We can prove this very easily. On the federal level, when Verizon and AT&T, when SBC wanted to go out and claim that they wanted to go out and build UVerse, it wasn't to build UVerse. It was to close down the network's competition. In fact, Michael Powell in 2004 congratulated SBC for its fiber to the home 100 megabit services that it was supposed to be rolling out in 2004. It didn't do it. In terms of and what did SBC want? It wanted to buy AT&T. So it came up with we're going to do 18 million households and use that number. It was fictitious. There were no maps. The gigapower stuff that they're talking about, fictitious. Now what they'll do is they'll roll out enough to show that they're doing something until the law does or does not go through. Verizon, for example, wanted to buy ACI. That was their major reason for rolling out Fios. It had nothing really to do. They didn't care about the broadband. They didn't care about the customer. And now the goal, when they talk about these deployments, Verizon said, we finished our 18 million households, we're done. Well, what did they get? They got MCI, which is what they wanted, and they got rid of regulation to close the networks. So in terms of the investment issues, it has nothing to do with the building. It has everything to do with the political adjustments that are of their long-term targets. And we've documented this in 30 states, which is something maybe we can talk about separately, because we have all the detail.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, we can discuss. I mean, I think that no, I don't know, Jim, if you want to.
Well, I'm not quite exactly sure how it fits, but I think it's relevant to Bruce's comments in part, and that is that we know that these cost subsidies cause problems. We've known that for a long, long time, and we also have talked about ways of implementing these things. And if you look at these broadband infrastructures, if by having them as cost subsidies, they're hidden. It's the Posner hidden tax that you don't see, so people can't complain about it. So if we would, decide that the government should invest in this infrastructure, however its funds are raised, there could be, back to the democratic process, it could be a review of, is this the right investment? Is this the right place to put your money? Whereas we don't have any of that process at all. So it gets to one of your questions: is should we, the politically incorrect question, should we invest there at all?
I just want to insist on something that Raul mentioned, because when you look at the developing world, in Latin America, Asia, other parts of the world, I mean, this is trivial. We know that connectivity is not enough. Connectivity is just the first step to it. And it really involves an ecosystem where content and literacy, digital literacy, is very important. So these funds apparently are just looking at one part, and they're not really looking at what the demand is requiring, not only in terms of speed, but in terms of what kind of content do they use. And there is a business model for the bottom of the pyramid that will not come out by itself. So I just wanted to insist on what I said before, that I think the government's role is more of a facilitator and a catalyzer to getting together the people, the business groups that will make adoption, not only connectivity, happen in this unserved area.
Enforcement and oversight of a contract is really the bottom line to all of this. If they say they're going to do something and it's in writing, and you have that series of timelines and everything else, that's what you have to do. That's what's missing in most of the plans. There's no.
No, but imagine a place that does not have a contract. I'm just looking for. Imagine a place there is no contract, there is no service there. Nobody promised them anything, and there's a lot of parts of the world that are like that.
Right.
So it's just let's get the government out and there.
So when they give you money, you get your money, then that's a contract of some sort for me. And that contract.
The people can pay for this.
Right.
This is a bottom of the pyramid business model.
Right. Okay.
Are there any other questions from the audience?
I was just curious, Ro talked about it, and Heather as well, the mere threat of competition has a profound effect. To what extent has it been measured in terms of specifically Google in Kansas City and Austin and a few other places where they've threatened to go? Has anybody done studies on that? And on on the satellite side, I know there's a couple of plans, at least that I know of, for another back to the past kind of thing of LEOs, low Earth orbiting satellite schemes, as a way to deliver broadband in these, and to what extent are they, already moving things?
Yeah, I think your question about the threat of Google or other parties coming, if somebody else in the audience knows an answer about research on that, I don't at this point.
Bruce had
I can address the other piece.
Question a little bit, because the telephone companies see it as a threat, and that's why they have this legislative, this lobbying body that goes out and changes the law to say you can't have regulation.
Well, AT&T.
I'm sorry, you can't provide your own municipal
AT&T's
internet.
gig power. Comcast's 2 gig stuff. This is all in relationship to those announcements. We're all in relationship to Google. It doesn't mean they'll be deployed, but at least they have to do that.
I think the other satellite technologies in North America are, and it's an interesting question, because in parts of the developing world where there hasn't been anything rolled out, you can make a good technical case. It's still not clear whether they will happen. In North America, there's a lot of money going, that the HTS that I was mentioning, I mean, there's serious money going into that, and I don't know if there's really a big enough market, if enough people who are frustrated in rural areas will say, yeah, this works pretty well for me. I mean, the speed's pretty good. There's still some latency. As far as the LEOs, that would reduce the latency, but there's not a plan for coverage. And the problem with the North is that it's such a small market that, as you saw on and then the same is true with Alaska, the beams are not even covering much of that region. There's a picture I could have put on showing Alaska, and 2 of the new U.S. domestic satellites with higher capacity have very little coverage. It used to be the state of Alaska was very proactive in going to Commission FCC and saying, don't license the satellite, domestic satellite, unless it has an Alaska beam. And so the choices are actually diminishing in Alaska for that. I have a question for the state regulator, though, since he's still here. Is there any way to address this monopoly or market concentrated middle mile, where there doesn't seem to be any way to get hold of the pricing that is being used in Alaska? And it's probably not unique, but there doesn't seem to be any regulatory tool to try to address it.
I don't know the Alaska statute, but in New York it would be very limited because we don't have any jurisdiction.
Yeah,
over
that's what the
internet
Alaska
access,
PUC says too.
Either wholesale or retail.
Exactly. And so some of the providers, the potential resellers, are frustrated because they say, well, that network was built with federal era money. I'm not sure that that's relevant, but the point is that it's clear that pricing is considerably out of line in terms of demand, in terms of ability to pay, and in terms of potential usage. Of course, the carrier would argue, well, no, we have to repay the 88 million, whatever. But yeah, there doesn't seem to be any mechanism, just as you described, an even more frustrating case. I thought the audience, somebody might raise the question, so, how much is it worth spending or worrying about 2% of the market in Canada, or a very small percent, less than 1% of the U.S. population in Alaska? So nobody brought that up. But I mean,
Do you have phone service, by the way?
Yeah.
I mean, with wired or?
She lives in Berkeley.
No, it depends where you are. A lot of
Because under the
Alaska.
Telecom Act of 1934, which Alaska is still part of the state, they're required to give you phone service no matter what.
Yes, there is phone service.
And you let carrier of last resort.
Most countries have that model in carrier of last resort. It's a question of upgrading for broadband. But I tend to agree, I think, with Judith that, there's likely to be ongoing disparities between what's available in major urban markets or major parts of industrialized countries as well, and rural markets. But that, so be it. But there's a minimum threshold below which it's not possible to do things that are useful now to operate, to do banking, to file reports, to operate a business, or do things remotely. And that's what I think is of concern in both those jurisdictions and a lot of developing countries,
Absolutely.
This to Bruce in a way.
So you were talking about the Title II, and the problem with Title II in a way will likely, or so it is claimed, reduce somewhat the investment. And at the same time, you also want to...
No,
let me finish. It's a side issue.
Okay.
Darcy's point about not having, Heather's point is not having investments in certain areas. So now you resolve that issue by saying, well, there is this pot of money that was promised but not delivered. Okay, but forget about that for a moment, because even if we get to that pot at some point in the future, you will need new money. Okay, at that point, I need to understand what it is that you're proposing in order to generate that money, because it cannot come out of nowhere. Would it be general revenues? Would it be a communications tax? What is it?
Okay.
You cannot simply say they didn't spend it, they promised it, therefore we have no problem.
Okay. Number one.
That's the rabbit thing.
Yes. First one is there's a couple of different answers. Different states are different. Let me just take New Jersey. It has an agreement, et cetera, et cetera. The rates were built. The current rates have built into them the cost of maintaining and upgrading the networks.
Okay. So already customers are paying for this already.
No matter what, yes. So if they don't build it, or they do build it, the money was always allocated within those rates.
Okay, but
that's part one.
But that means that there is already a system of cross subsidies. That in effect, I'm asked to pay for Darcy's broadband service. Yes, let's put this.
Or asked to pay for your own service. Yes.
Yes. No, but it's different.
He's making a different point. He said that they pay for the service. Forget about rural and urban. They're just not getting the service that was promised.
Okay, wait.
Yeah, I don't know that, but I'm just trying to get out of that history. He said.
No. This is current. This is 2015. They're still collecting the rates that were set were basically set on the promise, on the premise that the construction budgets would be X. Okay. So let me go to New York State.
No, I'm really trying to. I want to understand the system that you propose, and you think it has not been enforced yet, that I pay for Darcy's phone bill. Is that basically what you're saying?
No.
So where does Darcy's subsidy come from?
Okay. Darcy's subsidy comes from a pool of money that everybody's paying into for the utility.
Okay, so that's me.
That's fine.
Okay. Well, but you may have gotten the service. She may not have.
Well, then we have the history. Can we just...
Okay, sorry, let me finish. Okay, that was part. Okay. Yes, there's a pool. You pay for that service as a pool, as a part of the pool.
That's the universal service.
That's the universal service. Right. But part two.
From Columbia.
Right. Part two is a little different. Okay. What we uncovered in New York was that Verizon, in all the subsidiaries, were basically getting a free ride off the backs of the customers paying for PON service. Okay. The Verizon Wireless is paying nothing, at least as far as we can tell, for the wires that went to the cell towers. And it was part of, and they did that because it was categorized as Title II. If that money is taken out, or the wireless company has to pay for those wires, that's $250 million a year in New York.
Okay. Sorry, I don't want to bore everyone, but I really got to
Maybe you're going to
Elliot,
have this as a coffee
yeah, we're
discussion.
gonna
nail you down into kind of, is it the shareholders, or is it kind of the other ratepayers, or who is paying for Darcy? There has to be a clear answer to that.
The answer is everybody was being charged the extra money for the wireless company. Everybody, that money is now put back into the pool, of which that pool is then used to go out as part of the utility, goes out and pays for Darcy and everybody else.
Just one thing, it hasn't
No,
to
you
do
don't.
with this.
Apples and oranges.
I am with you.
As soon as we need several paragraphs for an answer, it probably means that we should.
Ellie, we have 15 minutes for a coffee break. You can get it there.
The shareholder doesn't pay anything.
Excess profit. The one with excess profit. That's
an answer.
The shareholders got it was excess profit to the shareholders.
Shareholders in the community.
all right. Coffee time.
No.
Okay, on that note,
I can show you how the money works.
I'd like to thank the panel.
So we're having coffee.
There's
No,
coffee.
about now. How it works in the future is we basically stop the subsidies to the utility companies. That extra money goes back to the utility. That utility money is used to wire the rest of the state.
Folks, on that note, if we could be,
Verizon New York is a public utility, yes.
on that note, if we could,
The PSDN, the public utility.
Are you talking universal service or you're talking,
That's
he's talking
the
rate?
question. That's the question. Ellie's trying to
He's saying there's both. There's universal service fund that should pay to put.
No, I'm talking about universal service.
We're not talking
the public
about
switch telephone network.
We're talking about the basic rate.
The PSDN is the utility.
But it's Mr. Complicated. Darcy is paying less than her cost, so somebody else is paying more than that.
Right, well, that's it.
It's not-
But isn't that, but that's universal service. That's the subsidy to go from urban to rural.
So the urban people pay for the rural.
But now there's no more money.
That's a strict answer.
But that's not the answer. The answer is
He's got a, no. He's talking about a second set of money. That because it used to be on long distance, right? But now he's saying that there's more money that was collected on, say, POP from his.
Yes, I enjoyed yours too, by the way. Now you have me thinking about privacy all this time.
Good.
It was actually good. I actually was surprised at the when you parse it how much complicated more complicated it
Very
gets.
cool.
I'm very sorry, but I screwed up the webcast on your thing. It died halfway through.
For a long time.
So that's
At
sad.
the end of it, right, at the end of the day,
you'll
we
just
don't
have to,
have a way. And he goes,
You
no,
know,
we do have
I
a
know
way.
if I can
but we
save
can't
bits of it,
disagree.
but
I'm
it's,
more with you that.
I'll just have to do it
I
again.
was just snake bit right there.
How do you solve it?
And the pulp.
I agree.
Very nice
Speaking
presentation.
of that, the universal service does not work.
Right? No. No, it doesn't. Never has.
No.
Right. Oh, really? Right. No. We all get that. I know what question he's asking. It's a question Bruce and I have argued over countless beers. You know, we don't have an answer to. Well, then what? And then what happens?
I don't
If you ignore the past, can't you condemn to repeat?
We're already repeating that's but in the fix, if you take some, you get some of the money, let's blow back some of the money, you say, you still have to build, and you're gonna need more money. And you need something to build. And then you need some machine to cover.
I mean, the problem is that they're not supporting young people. That's the point.
No. There's two different sets of money. There's the universal service fund, and then what's subsidy to rural from the urban. Right?
Yeah.
Right. That's separate. Wait a minute.
So these people aren't being subsidized, that's the point.
Well, no, that's still is. That's really, that's what grows. It's $6 billion source of everything. It still exists. And in fact, it's got more. The subsidies have gotten bigger as because the pool of wireline customers that are shrunk. It's for hot silence. They also, that was usually out of, in the old days, that was out of part of what the way it's labeled on the regular rates. And then when it went to universal service, what they made for farms on the law. That still existed for a lot of places. But he's saying that there's, but then on top of that, they got multiple increases to build a fiber line to everybody that they pocketed. And that's true. And Ellie is asking the question that he and I have debated over countless times, which I say at the end of the day, something else, okay, let's get some amount of money back. It would cost more today than it would have, that's 3 years ago when they started being plugged out. Okay, but you are, you should build it, and how do you govern it? And how do you get the extra money? We don't have an answer. The reason the promise works when they pull this shit is because at the end of the day, they say, we don't know what's going to be. And you can't force them to do it. That's the problem. Upstate, right now, they can't, he doesn't have enough of a stick as the regulator to hold Verizon's heat to the fire in Sullivan County. First of all, because broadband wasn't to deliver pots. They could barely keep them. They had a huge fight to get to restore after seeing so the regulators have less power. So Ellie's question, this is the street from Baltimore. They built it. How do we get it built? Even after we're saying this is correct. It's still, and this is I have argued a lot about this, is that one of all this stuff that we're talking about, you don't have answers. And there's no answer. If there was a there's no answer because if you make the government right, then it becomes anti. It's the fears it becomes anti. Right? It becomes another failed government. In fact, that was the best way would be the government gets the funds and they hire a contractor, whoever that is, to run it. The closest and Fred Goldstein, right, but the most expensive part of the network is running the water. There's tons of backhaul fiber in America, and the rates are relatively cheap. I mean, I'm trying to do this just you know. Absolutely. And the other way I heard somebody phrase it when FedEx service they would get a subsidy. But when they have to run a truck down the road to get from one customer 30 miles, do they? I don't know that they do. I don't think they do. They do it by states. I don't think they do it by on that basis. I saw that you're overlap. I remember from grade class in 76, I was Harvard in 77, some couple of classes in 74, 75. I lived in where in 75, 76. I lived on North Street in 74. So it was one of my favorite times. And my roommate now they're all doctor this and doctor that. So we have to go live, the whole place. That's it. Yeah, zero.
Actually, I could have folks say that.
No,
I think they're not going to end up having
We have everything right there. And she's not from companies, yes.
Verizon is going to do what? AT&T is going to do what? I would love to get them to fill in the holes in the way. But why do they fill in it? Now, only right now, I think there might be an opportunity. It could be implied that New York State is going to afford it.
What do you guys supposed to vote on the merger this week? Okay, how do we get them to do an investigation?
No, bring it into the telehouse. Bring it into the telehouse. That's exactly what.
Because basically, social media, they don't keep the price up, the context of it. That's because they have $800 people we need. And we did leverage, they can do things in other areas. That's more leverage.
Let's give them the money. Somebody can surprise her. So it's upstate lines. And I actually remember. Okay, so here's the story. That's what. And what I've been told is what Frontier said was Verizon's willing to sell. They want too much money. okay? And the smaller guys in the western part of the state said they'd love to take over some of that territory, but they don't have Verizon-friendly products. So how can you pressure Verizon? And the employees are very disgruntled up there. You know, they're not retraining them or anything.
What has to take is
Don't have good jobs.
They'll have good jobs, but they won't have
Oh, I see.
Right, but
the same salary.
You know that conversation earlier about crowdsourcing and so on. The big thing is like shaming, public shaming. This is the phenomenon of our age that communication networks today allow them to public shaming. So you can do this and you can find someone smoking a gun.
If we can show that they pay for the wireless networks,
You can
and all this money
have
is
them running like
we can say that you have to use the copper.
I'm
They're
feeling
very money.
there's no way to really do that.
Oh, this way of proving it. I don't do data.
Where'd you get the data?
Well, I use this stuff, as well as the stuff that I got from the SEC, as well as the old FCC Army data.
The problem is that Bruce has the sticks, but he's too mouthy to like people about. You need someone who knows how to like.
I need a mouthy person.
He needs a good.
You're not sufficiently mouthy.
No, I
You need someone like, you know, a good hitter to take his data and keep Verizon around the head.
I would be happy to look at all that stuff. It predates my time.
No, well, what I'm doing is I'm waiting to, we're trying to find some funding because we got some documents we shouldn't put out on Verizon. It shows that they didn't pay for the wireless cell towers. You got from some of the guys. Basically, that's what we need in the States. We're not paying for this. I can legally use, like this legally, don't use anything I want, just put it out. The problem is I don't have my money to go out and take it to court and get all the auditors and everybody else lined up once we actually put it out.
Let's back off and get into traditional rate because that's the last time we'll know. If that was entitled to put into the rate base, if it was allocated interstate, the remedy on US is that the FCC determines what but they didn't really have a trust on the rate of return.
Okay, well, it's not just rate of return. What it looks like is if you look at construction budgets, the AG, and 75% of construction budgets would move to the wireless and wireless. And the question is whether or not it is legal for the under Section 254K of the Telecom Act, whether or not they charge local phone customers for this construction. Or like tell us that's what happened. And they did a lot of states. Okay, well that'd be great. But we have to, the problem to me is
You know how to reach them.
yeah.
You can't.
That's right.
Oh, well, I know him, but he's hung out with him in the bar.
I never even turned my location on.
The problem is I have to raise $75,000 to $1,000, but besides this, we have to get to court. We have to get the FCC, the Section 254K, and the whole.
So who's got money that wants to fund
So
something
that's what
like this?
I'm trying to figure out. We figured to do a legal defense one. Because if you guys can already hire us and give me the data that we have, and without, you know.
One thing that has come out in this, you know, in this Tele2 fight is that the internet companies have finally woken up to the fact that their future is tied by, you know, not being able to reach Darcy's folks in Columbia County. Etsy's valuation goes down, and that's why Etsy joined the fight, and all those guys finally showed up. So there may be money for you there.
We've been trying to raise money for a couple of years on this because the auditing team and the lawyers are going to cost $50,000, $75,000. You know what I mean? There's no other choice. I don't have to walk into your office and say, hi, here's my great idea. But I don't have a lawyer to go out and defend me or lawyers. We have one of them. Turns out they
I understand the law perfectly. I've been in that legal arena for 25 years. Give me the economics.
Well, turns out that one of the lawyers, the former lawyer from the consumer company, David Berg, nice guy, and he's been working with us. And we also have another guy, Paul Hartman, who's a former FCC lawyer. He was running the FCC joint board. One of those two. And now he actually had to work in the New York Commission, or worked in New York, one of the two. But they're the ones who basically said, here's the legal bar, and I had to hire them to go out and make the case. But yes, that's the next hour, next
I don't really agree with just being a little argument.
The elevator pitch.
You're based in Albany?
Okay, well, I'll keep that in mind. We were trying to pull this together, a couple of months, but, and I also need to get paid for rent. There's minor things like that. That's the main problem. So we have a class action that we're supposed to settle on a hire, and that didn't happen, so.
What happened when?
He gets the percentage, and he gets the percentage. They want me to win. He gets the camera.
Yeah. I consult with him, he consults with them. What happened when the Public Service Commission had the time card, Warner here in New York, you said something, and you said you would follow up with the guy.
The administrative blood judge. The guy that this is in New York, me, I don't understand. President. He was the we get. He sees the report.
Yeah.
I made to get too fast.
And then they're going to suppose we took some stuff out of comment and.
So you want me to just ask you, I don't have a set of questions here.
Yeah,
Am I
it's
supposed to do that?
kind
Or did I do that?
of crazy because you guys are such great meetings. You're the only one when I tell people what. I said,
Well, you were the organizer, you probably have some.
No, but
so what
Ellie
would you
was
say?
the
Well,
time.
what do you need us? We have phase one. We just, thank you. Here's our filings. Redacted.
Do you have
California was.
All right, if we can get started again.
All of the subsidiaries of Verizon.
This is yours, Lynn?
My favorite was.
This is
Echo,
yours?
Yeah,
Verizon,
okay, I've got two
Verizon
flash
Charlie, Verizon Delta.
When you call it.
The subsidiaries. I have no idea.
Show what the CITC did. I'm gonna have swing out of that.
So, you want these people all up here, Ellie, at the front.
Ellie, Land, myself, but I'm going to kind of stay off because I have to do this.
Oh, yeah, you're.
Arms.
Da, 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 da.
Len Wehrman, he's here.
Can I just make an announcement?
You can do, yeah,
You may get do anything you want. It's your place.
sure place. Well, it says Jim, Henry, Ellie, Greg, Len, but I think you
Why
could
don't
sit
you,
anywhere,
why
we
don't you
would know who you were.
skip me because I've talked too much. I'll
No, you can
just
stay up here.
I have a question to everybody here in this grand hall, and that is, after we have some drinks and cheese or whatever, there is a group of us planned perhaps to go to have dinner at some nearby restaurant on Broadway. This is kind of everybody's on their own.
Oh, yeah,
If you'd
the
like to
PTV
for
thing.
the company.
You can show them.
But we need to make a reservation,
Yeah,
and
show
for that
them that.
purpose, we need to
show
have a
what you can
head
pay.
count. So could you possibly,
Yeah, well, that's worth doing, I didn't.
by raising your hand,
You gotta
either
put
with
the
one hand
sticker
or with
back
two
on.
hands, if there's somebody else involved, give us an indication who would be joining, and so that it can be any place, anyone between 0 and 2,000. So can I?
You just raise your hand.
We know what place is it and what time do you go till?
It would be probably.
What kind of cuisine?
It's Ferdinand Schmidt. It's like classic American fare.
Okay, I've got a significant other to communicate with, so.
Yeah, me too. 6
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. It's kind of, it used to be the West End, but it's now under.
It used to be the West End, then it was.
It's on Amsterdam and.
No, it's on Broadway. I'm just 13th and Broadway. It's like about a 5-minute walk from here.
Okay, well, perhaps we can ask that question in a few minutes. Okay, but in the meantime, are there any minutes up here?
So,
One.
Ellie, is your hand up? My count you.
Maybe one.
Maybe.
You should stay as long as you can in New York.
Then I gotta go to Rochester tomorrow morning.
Jason, how do we get the screen back on? I pushed projector on, but it didn't like me.
Projector's on, just need to close.
It's what?
Seemed like it was colder earlier.
You're going to show my slide?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, welcome to the final session. What we hope to do is just see if there are any common themes or issues to discuss. I think someone raised, I think it was Jim raised a question with me earlier about, is there material here that we could publish or turn into a publication, a book? And I think the answer is, yeah, there's some good material. There's probably not a whole book's worth in this room, but it's the beginning of something. And where would we go with this issue of rethinking regulation, as I put it, or back from the brink, or up from the ashes, or whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to give each panelist a chance to make a couple of comments or say anything that either they thought was overlooked or they think are useful remarks to kind of pull this together. And I'm going to start with Len because he put up on the screen something that I did not mention because I focused on one particular proceeding, but I think is well worth thinking about in terms of another recent Canadian decision that addresses some of the issues that came up in the discussion here.
So back from the ashes, I presume, I guess what we're really meaning, it's not just ashes, but the fire has been burning slowly.
But we didn't start the fire.
So Canada, just the CRTC, which is the regulator of telecoms and broadcasting, has had recently a hearing called Let's Talk TV, because they want to have hearings with phrases that the average consumer can understand. I guess they go to marketing firms. And so their decision was this, that for television, a broadcaster has to have either pick and pay, i.e. no bundles, period, and a choice of either build your own package or a small pre-assembled package. They must pick, all TV providers must offer both options. Or pick and pay, or a choice of either build your own package or small pre-assembled packages, and they can choose between those options. But once they choose, they're locked in till the next hearing. And the entry-level TV service is $25 or less per month, must include all local and regional television stations, provincial educational, community and provincial channels for mandatory distribution, may include other Canadian, local AM, FM, and affiliates of U.S. networks, which is what Canadians want. Okay. And so a huge hue and cry, of course, from the broadcasters that they'll go broke, and from a number, of course, most outcry was from a number of specialty channels which are now bundled in, like the Weather Channel, and do not want to pick or pay, because how many people would want to pay for the Weather Channel?
Yeah.
Okay, that's 3. Good. And you can pay for it. Thank you. Actually, I like the Weather Channel. So that's what's going on in Canada, so where there is still regulation. And then the other slide I wanted to show you, if I can work this thing, is after listening to everything today, as remember where we've come from, is that regulation is a two-edged sword. And so we can use it to solve today's problems, but remember back to the Telecom Act of '96, which we thought would then solve those problems. And what did it do? Exacerbated the problems. And so we've got to be very we've got to be very aware of, as I said before, beware of what you achieve. Because if you bring back regulation, you may end up with an animal which is worse than today. So, for example, you worry about, as you do in the States, which we worry about in Canada as well, which is cable TV pricing, and I listen with horror to 100 and what % increase in 2 years. So let's say you go back and put in the FCC has regulations over pricing of cable TV. Now, is that a world you really want? Will that lead to what? You know, imagine those hearings and imagine the appeals to the courts and what kind of cross subsidies and what the world will look like in 5 years under that regime. So one has to be very careful in thinking about if there's real problems. Now, I understand the problems you're dealing with, Bruce, because the Federal Trade Commission is not going to look at this industry. They're worried about abuse of dominant position when you're abusing a competitor. But abuse of dominant position involving consumers, they're not going to get into price regulation. They're going to say go to the FCC. So you're kind of stuck between a rock or scissors and paper, I guess. so those are. But I found today very rewarding to be here, and I learned a lot. And I think that we have to keep looking at it. And I would hope that besides our friend from LSE, we get other young people. I see some people here under the age of 40. We get other young people interested in this subject again because it is a critical subject, and you know. But a number of us have been looking at it for too long. So, thank you.
I guess I would say, thinking about the Telecom Act of '96, yes, it certainly created problems, but it also had some very interesting and relevant points. I remember at that time some people said it doesn't say anything about the internet. It talks about advanced services. Well, in a sense that was good. I mean, advanced services then were sort of interactive video conferencing or something. So having something that that you can shoehorn new definitions in was not a bad thing. Plus we got these subsidies for schools and libraries, which in a sense was the government's or Congress's way of saying we're concerned about education and also about having some access for communities. How it rolled out was in some cases not optimal, but that was the first time before universal service was availability of it was all household based and it was only telephone. So, you know, that's the positive. If a sword has a positive side, I'm not sure what.
Which side though?
I think that's the good part. You know, it cut through a lot of uncertainty at that time. And I will say for Canada that I think this is a very interesting commission to watch. They've been extremely proactive. They've tried very hard to engage a wider cross-section of citizens in their decision making. So the process as well as some of the decisions is relevant. But now, Ellie, what have we got out of this? Was this what you and Jim had in mind, or where do you think we should be going from here?
Well, first of all, I thought it was remarkably interesting and varied and good speakers, and I think we could get some kind of really interesting publication out of it. Now, so what I tried to raise at the beginning was, and I was looking also for the answer to it, but sometimes what we just see is that are we just gone full circle? And by which I didn't mean necessarily that we're back to the past, although that's part of it, but also whether there's a certain inevitable logic in how we deal with networks, where however they are, and so there might be blips around, up and down, but ultimately that there's certain fundamentals there, such as the natural monopoly, the universal service, the open access, these things that kind of like fundamentals, and however you call it, they will come back, whether they call it net neutrality or carriage or whatever it is. So whether that's all there is to it, interesting enough that or whether there is in fact something else that is different. Okay, and so I would suggest maybe two paths. Okay, the first one is that the problems that we are encountering don't necessarily have ready policy tools. Okay, so in the olden days, when AT&T had too much market power, we would just cut it up. Or we would kind of regulate the local companies, or whatever it was. Cable similarly. But today, market power issues are much harder to deal with. Think about this. Let's say Google. Okay, Google has kind of like 80–90% of the search, certainly on the consumer level, search market, and it has it globally. So if you think that's not good, so what are you going to do about it? Yeah, what are you going to do about it? I mean, the European Commission is dealing with this only in some ways the tail that the dog wags, which is that somehow they claim that they're using it to favor their own services. So Google will say, fine, we're not going to favor our own services. We still have 90% of the market. That's the problem. It's not the vertical integration. It's the market power in that core business. And so what is the United States going to do? What is Europe going to do? What is Nicaragua going to do about that? Similarly, if Netflix or a company like Netflix is all over and distributes content, how is this going to be handled by national media policies anymore? I mean, you can, the Chinese certainly are showing the way, but clearly the ability to control this in these old ways are declining as so many operations are offshore. Similarly, the consumer protection, similarly the qualities and the price regulation. I mean, how it can, let's say, are we going to tell Netflix what quality its pictures are going to be? And what happens if they give one quality of picture, visual frame rates or bit rates or whatever, to one kind of people and another to another people, and Darcy gets a lousy picture quality, say? Are we going to go to Netflix and require them to upgrade or downgrade or do something? How is this going to happen? How is this going to work once we're outside of the traditional model? Okay, so I think that suggests to me that one really has to think very hard beyond the restoration of the good old order. Has to think about kind of new tools and new approaches, which in some cases may be to do nothing, but in other cases, such as consumer protection or so on, clearly would have to be doing something, whatever that might be. That in its first round has to be an academic exercise, I would think. I mean, this is kind of the FCC or the state commissions, I've been there myself. I mean, they do many good things, but kind of like, you know, being in the, let's call it, in the thought leadership business is really not one of them. In fact, shouldn't be, really, because you have to have already kind of a little bit more of a consensus and these things thought through in crazy possible ways. So that's number one. So I think there's a real role for academia in this. Now, here's an example or a direction which I think is really important. Somebody early said something about software. Was it you? Somebody mentioned it?
It was somebody in the audience.
Okay, so maybe it was Raul. So let me kind of push that a little forward. And that is the whole issue of algorithms and the regulation of algorithms. I mean, you have in the regulation through algorithms in a way, so that may give us some interesting new ways to think about issues. The regulation of algorithms means that we would tell companies in some ways how they have to structure things, for example, traffic control, for example, down-throttling, up-throttling, for example, copyright takedowns or something like that, or the right to be forgotten, basically, which is kind of a fancy way to say you can save that stuff only for so long, and then it has to vamoose into the space beyond cyberspace. So those are kind of things which we could not think of in the past where we regulated prices and we regulated quality. Now we have other things that we can do, and we can do them in possibly more refined ways, because the internet, digital communications really enables fine-tuned, almost personalized type regulatory approaches. And then secondly is that's the regulation of algorithms, and then there might be a regulation by algorithms in which there would be some form of public policy tool almost. Again, that could be regionalized, personalized, functionalized, whatever, that would be applied to different type of situations or companies or environments. Now, I have not really thought this through carefully yet, but I suggest that this is a very fruitful direction for people to think about in academia and in regulatory bodies too.
Okay, thank you so much. Greg, are there any insights you could share? What's the role of the state in both regulation and policy at state level in the U.S. in this new environment, or is it a new environment? And are there any insights from this broad cross-section of papers or presentations that you thought were relevant?
Well, I think overall we have to back up a little and look at the big picture. In broadband, availability really is getting better. Speeds are really getting better. The price per tier, any given tier of speed, is really getting better. It's not getting better fast enough. And that's where regulators have an opportunity to step in. But what I got were some warnings from this conference. One is something that I've heard before too. Cost-based pricing means whatever the author of the cost study wants it to mean, which means that once you adopt the result of a cost study, you are going to create some kind of regulatory arbitrage, so be very, very careful. The other key takeaway I have is that it's important to find out what we really need to regulate. Clearly regulate that and send a market signal to the market that we're not going to regulate the rest of it. And that will best preserve the open market where we don't have to tread. But there are things that are getting worse, not better, in particular privacy and cybersecurity. And we have no real regulatory tools at the FCC or the state commission level to deal with those other than continuously monitoring the companies that are within our jurisdiction and making sure they go through checklists and exercises and keep up to date with the latest developments in both of those areas. But it's very difficult, except for the utilities that we regulate much more directly, like the energy utilities, to tell the companies exactly what they have to do.
Okay, thank you. Jim and Henry, I'm putting you on notice. You're supposed to be up here too, but you can talk from there if you want, but I'll give Jim a chance to say, since Jim, this was your idea, or your and Ellie's idea, what have you taken from this, or where do you think we should be going from here?
Well, I'm very pleased with the way this program came out, because I think we've got some great papers out of this and some useful directions to do future research in. To Greg's point, yes, costs can be defined, but I think the other part of that lesson is you have to be very careful in this kind of dynamic, ever-changing environment as to where you start to draw any kind of cost boundaries. And I'm hearing you say don't do it at all, because you'll be in big trouble if that indeed happens. The one thing that I really like Mark Cooper's the Cooper approach, because it was very, it understands that there's has to be new tools, new instruments to regulate this sector. And the other thing I think that we've learned here, although I don't know how we implement it necessarily, is that these tools have to be rapid response kind of tools. They can't be the long drawn out set of regulations litigated and 6 or 10 years later are decided by the courts and you have to start all over again. So that's the one thing so that's why I like that we have to start thinking really in non-traditional terms about how we regulate. It's kind of like when we came up with price caps. That was new and integrated. We need a new price cap regulation. The other thing that I hope that comes out of this, and maybe I'm speaking to the choir here, is that it doesn't have to be total deregulation, or it doesn't have to be hard and fast and strong regulation, but there's many Goldilocks of regulatory porridges in between. And it's not black and white, there are shades of gray, and we should work on some of those to understand where somebody didn't like optimal, but a better form of regulation will work. The other thing that I don't think it was brought up, I thought Len might bring it up, but it has been mentioned several times, is internet security. I think we look at internet security and we look at it as a private good, that we secure our computer, but if you think about it, it really has a lot of externalities, and I think that internet security is really a public good. And classified as a public good, we should treat it as a national, in the same way we treat national defense, i.e. the government should be much more involved in making sure the network's secure, not just for each individual, but for all the malware that's out there that can be very destructive. It's one person not taking, getting the best kind of antivirus software can destroy a lot of other computers and networks and create different kinds of attacks. So it's really not necessarily a private good that individuals should be buying, but the governments should be really working very hard to ensure that the network is secure as best it can. And that's not just, so maybe it's a public-private partnership.
It's the government that decimated that security and that trust with their behavior as revealed by Snowden, isn't it?
I have no comment.
We would backdoor.
That was one branch of government. but
that distinction will be lost on many of them.
Many distinctions are lost on Congress. But I think we should start thinking in terms of that network security as a public good and see where that takes us and what can be done. So that's my takeaway.
Okay. Now, Henry could speak from there if you want to do have any. You could come up here.
Well, I can speak from here. People can hear me.
Can they?
Yeah, it's all right. It's all right.
All right. Yes. Okay. Well, as I said this morning, we're really reflecting on really the span of time from when the liberalization, deregulation, or regulatory reform process began through to the present. I see it as, in some respects, having significant successes, but I also believe that there have been disappointments, or at least aspects of the situation that have certainly not evolved in the way I expected. I cast myself back by introspection to the world of the use of at least some of us in this room. the expectations that we widely held, some have been fulfilled, but others have not. And that really raises the question that, well, we're certainly older, but are we also wiser? And if so, in what respect? And it seems to me that there were two expectations that were, I believe, fairly widely held that have not quite played out as expected. The first was, I think we were more optimistic in terms of the development of infrastructure competition in the fixed network than ultimately proved to be the case. And what is, I think, still somewhat controversial is why that was. Whether that was because we were simply wrong and fixed network had stronger inherent natural monopoly features than we thought, or the sunk costs were much larger and acted as a more effective deterrent for entry than we expected, or the incumbents achieved much greater gains in productive efficiency than we had anticipated, and so the scope for competing entry was naturally limited, or whether regulation itself and the regulatory instruments had an impact, and if so, what the extent and nature of that impact was on the ultimate evolution of market structure. Then the second respect in which I think developments have at least surprised me and to a degree disappointed me is that I believe we had much higher expectations of what incentive regulation could and would do in improving the machinery of regulatory intervention and reducing what were rightly perceived as the very high costs that regulation had in terms of efficiency losses and reductions in social welfare. If I look at where the world now is in terms of regulation, and this comes to a point that Judith made this morning, where I think you were half right. And you said, look, the world has moved on. It's not back to the return simply to the status quo ante. And yes, there is a sense in which that's correct. You don't step into the same river twice, but you can step into the same bathwater twice. And there's a significant element of that in what we've done. It's colder, it's dirtier than it was the first time we were in there. So it has changed, but hasn't really improved. And all the very elegant conceptual architecture that we brought with us to the initial process of deregulation, while it remains theoretically intact and powerful, I believe has had much less impact on what regulators do in a day-to-day sense than was widely believed. And just to finish on that point, I'm sure I'm not alone in remembering, I know Len will remember this, when Michael Beasley and Stephen Littlechild were lecturing us, and I was somewhat skeptical of this, I must say, at this stage. So this would have been 81 or 82, on the beauties of the price cap mechanism that they had come up with. And Beasley stood up and said, look, this is just revolutionary. Here you have the rate of return proceedings, these rate setting proceedings, and they can take a year or 2 years. With price cap regulation, It'll be so simple. It will be done in a matter of days, if not simply at the regulator's stroke of a pen. And all the costs of those extended proceedings will melt away. Well, if only. If only. And so when you look back at that, the question to my mind is, if those were the premises we brought to the process, what is it of those premises that is worth salvaging? And how do we make the best use of it in this everything old is new again, bell bottoms are back. And let's see what part of our use might serve us well in our old age.
Okay, thank you. I think Len wants to make a comment, and then I'm happy to see if others, or I may call on you and play law professor and put you on the spot. Len.
I just want to follow up from Henry. So I was just looking here at January 16th of 2007, the day that Netflix unveiled their streaming service, and their stock price fell 6.3% because the analysts said they're entering a very crowded market. So today we see Netflix as an ogre, maybe. Remember the previous ogres we were really worried about? Remember the Microsoft hearings? And Bill Gates on the stand, and they're going to break up Microsoft. And
Think of IBM.
Think of IBM. Think of AT&T, which is now a brand. Right? Think of Nokia.
Western Union.
So I think we've got to realize. We see ogres today like Google and Netflix. Netflix, as I said, started streaming 8 years ago. And if you look at their profit margins, don't know how survivable they are. They're now developing their own content. So I think we've got to really be careful before we find a solution for a problem which may be in our eyes only at the moment and will not be a problem. Because at the end of the day, as a business school person, I like to rely on markets.
But suppose there is no solution. Okay, it doesn't have to be hair trigger, but 12 years
What's
later.
hair, anyways?
12
you use a different.
12 years later. So at some point, what kind of.
But isn't but that's I worry much less about those instances, because I can remember when people used to think that IBM would rule the world. But what I do think is that if you had asked me in 1980 what will happen in the fixed telecommunications network over the period ahead, I would have said, once you remove the barriers to entry, you will get a reasonable degree of competition. It won't be perfect competition, but you will get a reasonable degree of competition, and it will discipline prices and quality of service. If you look at the fixed network today, I don't think that's true anyway.
Yes, Raul, I was going to ask you if you had thoughts.
Following on his comment, I'm wondering, and that's what when I teach at the school, I tell them that the regulatory variable is actually not important at all. That basically this market and competition that is driving, the cycles, and the IBM cycle was overridden by just pure competition, and we might have affected at the edges of the problem, but really the reason why Google might be declining is because Facebook is superseding, and Facebook is going to be declining because now social networks have a different type of networks, much more segmented and content oriented. So maybe that's another conclusion, that in fact we'll be worrying about these regulatory variables the whole day, but maybe it might be on the margin of what's happening.
Bruce? I'm sorry. Yeah. No.
I was just, it seems that, especially in this room, isn't infrastructure different? And the regulation involving infrastructure different when you've got an essential facility? you know, if Google's abusive, I could use Bing. If Facebook, well, it's Facebook anyway, but Instagram is rapidly overtaking Facebook. So the market can discipline those actors. Whereas in Sullivan County, if Verizon tells the residents, we don't feel like rolling out DSL, doesn't matter what we've collected unless Bruce can prove it, we're not going to roll out DSL and you're out of luck. There's no regulatory answer for that right now, and those, you know, like rural electrification or universal service for POTS, these are people that are disconnected from participating economically in our country, and what do we want to do about that? And it's a hard question, because, you know, I'm up there in the sticks trying to do that as a WISP. It's a really tough question to put those components together with backhaul and towers and reach everybody. And if the incumbent's not going to do it, I don't know who will.
Other thoughts? Judith, do you have anything to add at this point? Or
I was just impressed by that.
You exceed your time?
You know, pull our hands. But it would be a critical question, you know, what is regulation? Done.
Okay.
I have one other question.
Yes. Get Bruce right this time.
The conversations, it's very obvious that there is no regulatory regime that's going to be able to cover the networks at this point. The FCC is taking over broadband. The states are going to basically lose, in some cases, be erased all their oversight on the source. So the question comes down to, are we erasing regulation to the point where the incumbents basically are no longer have any oversight? Who's going to force the hand to have something, to have rollout if there's only a few companies control the wireline, wireless networks? Okay.
Yeah,
just
I just have a story about Mexico that recently happens, you know, for, I don't know how many years, 50 years since Televisa is around, or 60, that the only television, you know, vertically integrated.
Yeah.
And because it has a political hand, being television, it has not been regulated. So they finally start regulating it, you know, like trying to get their dominant, so their advertising and their content. They're finally, you know, many years later, doing it. And really, when technology has already done it. When most people are watching, I mean, still my mother that is 90 will watch it, but so now they're opening up the market, and the same thing happened in fixed phones in Mexico. Now they're really regulating Telmex when you have AT&T coming in with incentives. So technology and competition are very hard, disciplinary.
Are making most of the difference.
Yeah.
Well, that's the counter argument. I mean, there's something to be said for both sides. Any final comments? People want some wine. Well, that's all right.
But just to clarify my point a moment ago, and in light of Judith's comments and the other comments, I think clearly you do have some situations where you can and will have competition in the fixed networks. In a particular case where you have competition between copper and cable. And where you've inherited that, I think that creates very powerful momentum. And if you can keep that momentum going, then there are significant gains. The question looking to the future is, I guess, what scope there is for wireless to add to that. And that, I think, is a complicated question, because then what really becomes important is the risk that regulation of one part of that complex will in some way prevent the potential for competition across that whole complex from developing. And at least from my perspective, I don't think we have ready solutions to how to do that. and in particular how to reconcile regulating those parts which at the moment don't face sufficient competition without stifling the development of competition where it could ultimately go.
I would say that this is for the, if there was one thing, regulation should do, is eliminate barriers to entry, even in unserved areas.
Yes, so certainly would work for Mexico, but it is also true that in the United States we also have. I mean, Televisa has the opposite problem in the United States. It cannot be a broadcaster here despite the large Hispanic population because of the 20% type ownership rules, so they have to kind of do this in a very indirect way, but it's clearly an efficient way to proceed. So, but can I just say, but let's say if you're talking about competition to Google, what is the barrier to entry against Google?
Well, I mean, there's Yahoo, there's Bing, there's other search engines. They're out there. Where's the consumer demand for the
Yes, so the removal of the barriers to entry is not going to solve that problem, I think.
What the network effects are quite a problem.
Yes.
Direct and indirect, there's no way you can overcome 95%. Look at Microsoft.
Yes, yes.
They try and they have only 5% of the market.
Okay.
But
My
technology
point,
may do
yes.
that.
Yeah, but people, in a way, said the same thing about IBM with its installed base.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
and exactly the same what was made about Microsoft with Windows. So really, the question in respect of those players is the degree to which you will get technological leapfrog, not competition from another search engine,
Right. But
but competition from
Something else.
that replaces the conventional system.
Yes. To the point of the
So
market.
we just have to wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't.
Less regulation prevents that change in technology, which has the potential to do.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
So in fact might stifle,
Less?
unless regulators stifle the technology that would compete with IBM or displace Google.
Stay tuned, we'll see what happens in Europe.
That's a
So,
bad idea.
can I ask you, what worries you about Google? I mean, is it discrimination? Is it high prices? Is it, what about the market power is disturbing you? It's efficient.
I think that any time that the information resources and flows of an entire planet go through a single kind of entity company, it worries me. It's not that they have done something, or not that they've actually contributed a lot, but I mean, think of the potentialities here, and so that does worry me, and I think should worry everybody. I mean, if Google decides that somehow, because of their algorithm, which is not really known to anybody, that Len Waverman cannot be found, it was only placed behind 7,000 other people, and you don't exist for practical purposes. Your papers don't exist.
With privacy.
Pardon?
Yeah.
That's what he wants.
But not that kind of price.
But you see, the great thing you forget, I think, is this, which is the ultimate saving feature of human society, the inherent inefficiency of very large organizations.
Yes.
Once Google controls the world, it will be like IBM was when you went there in the early 1980s. They'll be just too large. As they used to say about IBM, the fundamental constraint was there's not a sufficient number of button-down white shirts for IBM to rule the world. Equally, the supply curve of T-shirts is upward sloping. At some point, Google will run out of T-shirts and jeans, and someone else will do what they can.
Okay, but as
All right.
John Maynard
Wind
Keynes
this up.
said, in the long run,
We're all dead.
in the long run, we're all dead.
Yes, but there's another generation coming to get involved. Well, on that note, I would like to...
I remind you, we're in New York, and I remember the days when they wanted to break up the Yankees.
Oh, we got the Mets. On that note, I'd like to invite people to continue discussion over wine, and if Ellie or Jim have any final remarks or comments as hosts and sponsors. Otherwise, I will say we are adjourned. I don't know, sitting there under the sword of Damocles.